You're not my real son, Michael. This here is my true child. My father's voice cut across the crowded VFW hall as he draped an arm around my younger cousin Daniel, the words dropping like stones in a room already thick with the smell of beer, fried chicken, and August sweat. And I swear for a second, the fluorescent lights above buzzed louder just so everyone would hear it clearer. Everyone in that circle of folding chairs and styrofoam cups who turned their heads toward me, their mouths tightening in either pity or poorly concealed smirks, because public betrayals always draw out that same mixture of fascination and relief that it's not them, and I just stood there, frozen, holding the gift I had brought for him, an engraved silver pocket watch, the same kind he had once shown me when I was 12, saying a man should always know how to keep time, how to respect it, because nothing humiliates you more than being late. Before we get deeper into this story, make sure you're subscribed, and tell us in the comments where in the world you're listening from. My name is Michael Reynolds. I'm 38 years old, born and raised in Dayton, Ohio, and right now I wish I could tell you that this kind of moment comes with warning signs, that you can see the crack in the wall before it caves, but the truth is it blindsides you like a deer on I-70 at night, sudden and violent. And in the stunned silence that followed my father's announcement, I felt not only the sting of rejection, but something colder, heavier, like the quiet click of a lock turning in a door that had always been open to me. What nobody in that room knew, and I let a faint, bitter smile tug at the corner of my mouth as I caught my father's eyes, is that I have a skill, an advantage he never cared to notice, one that makes me far more dangerous than he could ever imagine. And though I didn't say it then, I already knew that tonight would be the start of the last lesson I would ever let him teach me. I didn't answer him right away, just set the box with the watch down on the table, next to the sheet cake with Happy Retirement Frank scrawled across it in blue icing. And I could feel Daniel's smirk widening, the smug satisfaction of a man who hadn't earned his place, but had been handed it like a free refill of Coke at a diner. No cost, no sweat, no sacrifice. The applause started weakly, a few claps here and there, some murmured congratulations, and I realized how fast loyalty evaporates when people smell drama, when siding with the stronger personality seems safer than asking questions. And I caught my mother's eyes across the room, but she looked away quickly, as though she'd rehearsed this silence, this complicity. The drive home that night felt longer than it should have. Even though the distance was barely 10 minutes down Main Street, the late summer air still heavy, windows down because the AC in my truck hadn't been working right, the cicadas screaming in the trees like an audience that wouldn't quiet down, and I thought about how many years I had spent keeping this family afloat, paying the mortgage when Dad's hours were cut, buying groceries when Mom's back gave out, and she couldn't stand in the Kroger checkout line for more than 5 minutes, sending Daniel money during his so-called job search, when everyone else had long written him off, and not once had I asked for anything back, not even thanks, because loyalty to family was supposed to be its own reward. I had worked my way up from nothing, putting in 80-hour weeks at the construction management firm, eating cold sandwiches in my truck while overseeing job sites, climbing until the paychecks stopped bouncing and the house I lived in was mine outright. No banks, no landlords, but when it came time for acknowledgement, for even a shred of recognition, my father gave it away to a boy who had coasted on charm and empty promises. In a way, I shouldn't have been surprised my father always liked the loud ones, the ones who told him what he wanted to hear, while I was the quiet grinder, the one who showed up without excuses, and maybe that's why the betrayal burned so deep, because it wasn't just about that one sentence in front of a crowd. It was about a lifetime of being overlooked until the very end when he had the chance to make it right, and he chose the opposite. I pulled into my driveway, gravel crunching under the tires, the porch light flickering like it hadn't decided whether to die yet, and sat there for a long time before going inside, staring at the box with the pocket watch still sitting on the passenger seat, unopened, unwanted, a gift-turned symbol of everything wasted. My father had once told me when I was a kid learning how to swing a hammer in the backyard, that a man's value was measured in what he left behind, and I had carried those words like gospel, built my whole life around them, but maybe the truth was he had never believed them himself. Maybe they were just lines to fill the air while I worked, a way to keep me moving. I took the watch out, turned it over in my hand, felt the smooth weight of it, and for the first time I wondered if its ticking would end up being the countdown to something more final, something irreversible. In the quiet of my kitchen, with the faint hum of the refrigerator and the faint rustle of leaves outside, I felt the humiliation hardening into something sharper, something colder, a blade being forged in the back of my mind, and I made a silent vow, not with fireworks or shouting, but with the same quiet determination that had carried me through years of struggle. I would not let this stand. My father thought he had humiliated me, thought he had written me out of the story of my own family, but what he didn't know, what none of them knew, is that I have a way of turning time itself into my ally, of waiting, watching, and choosing the perfect moment to strike. And the next time the world looked at me with pity, it would be the last. The following weeks passed with the kind of cruel slowness that makes every sunrise feel like a reminder of what you've lost. And yet each day I forced myself into routine, into the same black coffee at the kitchen table, the same drives down old Route 4 to job sites, where the smell of wet lumber and diesel exhaust felt steadier than anything at home. But every night the silence of the house pressed harder, because family noise had always been the background music of my life. Phone calls from my parents about little things, Sunday dinners, even arguments, and now it was just absence, deliberate and sharpened like a blade. And I began to realize they weren't just excluding me privately, they were rewriting me out of everything publicly. I learned it first through whispers from a neighbor who had attended one of Dad's poker nights. He was telling everyone Daniel was stepping up, that he had finally found a man in the family worth passing the torch to, that I had become too busy, too arrogant, too distant to deserve it, and I almost laughed at the absurdity of it, because if they only knew the hours I had sacrificed, the debts I had quietly paid, the nights I had pulled my father from bars when his temper nearly got him arrested, they would see the lie for what it was. But people rarely care about truth when a cleaner story is available, and Daniel was a cleaner story, the prodigal finally returning. The first time I saw them together after that night was at the diner off 5th Street. The one with the red vinyl booths and the jukebox that never worked, and I walked in just for a coffee on my lunch break when I spotted them, my father laughing with Daniel, introducing him to the waitress like he was some proud father with his son, and when the waitress asked if I wanted to join them, my father said without hesitation, "He's busy, he always is." Like I wasn't standing 3 feet away, like I was invisible, and for the first time in years I felt the metallic taste of rage on my tongue, bitter and hot, but I swallowed it down and ordered my coffee to go, because anger shown too early is wasted, and timing is everything. That night, I sat in my office surrounded by stacks of contracts and blueprints, and for the first time I didn't see just the numbers and schedules. I saw possibilities, patterns, ways to bend time and patience into something sharper, and I started writing things down, not grand schemes, not yet, but observations, leverage points. The habits of men like my father and Daniel, who needed public validation like oxygen, who couldn't survive without being seen, and I thought about how easily attention can be turned into exposure, how admiration can curdle into suspicion, and I realized that what they were building together was fragile, a castle made of cards, one strong gust away from collapse. Still, in the meantime, they were tightening their grip, moving quickly to secure what they thought was theirs, and the blow came harder than expected one Thursday afternoon when I received the certified letter in my mailbox. A revised will, filed officially, with my name struck out and Daniel's inked in bold, everything house, land, savings, even the family heirlooms transferred to him. I held the paper in my hands as the late summer cicadas buzzed in the distance, the heat radiating off the concrete, and I felt the world tilt just slightly, because it wasn't just rejection now. It was theft, sanctioned and legal, the final insult dressed up in paperwork. For a moment, I thought about storming over to their house, demanding answers, but then I caught sight of the pocket watch sitting on my desk, ticking steadily, and I reminded myself that patience wins wars, not shouting. A week later, I got a small taste of what victory might feel like, though it was fleeting. I was called into a board meeting at work where one of our biggest contracts was at risk of falling through, and everyone assumed I was distracted, too caught up in family drama to handle it. But I turned the presentation around with calm precision, securing not only the deal but an expansion that would bring millions into the firm. And when the applause came at the end, when my colleagues shook my hand and looked at me with respect, I felt a flicker of strength return, a reminder that I was still capable, still powerful, that no one could take that from me. Driving home that evening, windows down as the air finally hinted at fall, I let myself imagine, just for a second, that maybe my father would hear about it, maybe he would realize the mistake, maybe he would call. But when I pulled into my driveway, the small hope shattered instantly. Sitting on my porch was Daniel, leaning against the railing like he owned the place, a smug grin on his face as he handed me an envelope. Inside was a formal notice. My father was moving forward with selling the land I had spent years paying off for them, land I had poured money into to keep in the family. And Daniel looked at me with mock sympathy as he said, It's nothing personal, Mike, it's just business. In that moment, I understood fully. They weren't just erasing me, they were feeding on me, carving out pieces of my sacrifice and wearing them like trophies. I said nothing, just walked past him, the pocket watch cold and heavy in my jacket pocket, and as I closed the door behind me, shutting out his laughter, I realized this wasn't just about reclaiming what was mine, it was about teaching them the cost of underestimating a man who knows how to wait. September rolled in with that sharp Midwestern shift where the air carries both the last heat of summer and the first bite of fall, and as the leaves began to curl at the edges, I felt the same tightening in my chest, because the deadline was approaching. My father had set a date for a family announcement at the church hall, 1 month away, where he intended to publicly finalize everything. Sign over not just the estate but the legacy itself to Daniel, parading him like a conquering son while I sat in silence or didn't show at all, which was probably what they preferred, and that ticking date became the clock in my head. Each day a second hand moving closer, each morning coffee, the chime of inevitability. But what they didn't realize was that patience had always been my secret weapon, sharpened over years of waiting out job site delays, negotiating deals with stubborn contractors, watching markets shift until the perfect moment to strike, and now I was using that same discipline on them. While my father and Daniel flaunted their new alliance at every local bar, every cookout, every corner diner, I was quietly collecting documents, receipts, whispered stories from neighbors who'd seen things, the kinds of details men too drunk on their own egos leave lying around, and it didn't take long before the picture became clear. Daniel wasn't just lazy, he was reckless, siphoning money from Dad's accounts under the guise of investment opportunities. Gambling debts tucked behind online transfers. Favors owed to men in Columbus you wouldn't want knocking on your door at night. I sat in my office at 2 a.m, more nights than I can count. The only light, the desk lamp glinting off the silver pocket watch, ticking like a metronome to my planning, and I smiled at the irony that my father, who worshipped appearances, had handed the keys of his empire to the one man guaranteed to drive it into the ground. Still, they kept racking up wins on the surface. Daniel took over my father's truck, his workshop, even wore his old flannel jackets like costumes, and people ate it up, saying how good it was to see family stepping up, how proud Frank must be to have a son like him, while I walked the same streets with quiet nods, the respect I'd earned through years of sweat, now downgraded to polite indifference. My father stopped returning my calls altogether, and when I showed up at his house one evening, the porch light I had rewired for him last spring shining bright, Daniel answered the door and didn't even let me inside. Just told me Dad was resting and shut the door in my face, and behind it I heard laughter, muffled but cruel. I could have forced the door, shouted through it, demanded acknowledgement, but instead I turned back to my truck, sat in the driver's seat, and let the anger settle like silt in water because eruptions are short-lived, but silence has weight, and I wanted them to feel that weight when it came crashing down. The more they celebrated, the more careless they became, and I was there for all of it, unnoticed, invisible in plain sight, at the diner booth behind them, when Daniel bragged about buying land with money he didn't have, at the hardware store when Dad signed receipts under Daniel's name, too proud to see the trap he was stepping into. The closer we got to the announcement date, the more it felt like I was walking a wire between despair and resolve. And then one evening, with the first real chill of October settling in, I got the proof I needed. A notarized document slipped to me by an old family friend who still believed in me, showing that Daniel had quietly transferred part of Dad's savings into his own account, forging a signature so sloppy it was almost insulting, and I knew then that the clock wasn't ticking toward my humiliation, it was ticking toward theirs. Still, the hardest part of patience is pretending weakness while you hold strength, so I played the role, letting my shoulders sag, keeping my voice low, avoiding confrontation, even as rumors spread that I was finished, broken, that Dad had finally replaced the son who never measured up, and though it stung to hear, I carried it like armor. Because I knew what they didn't. The stage they were building so proudly was the same one they'd fall from. On the night before the church hall announcement, I sat alone in my living room, the pocket watch ticking on the table, and for the first time in weeks I let myself laugh, soft and short, because everything they had done to erase me had only written their own downfall more clearly, and tomorrow the town would see who truly deserved the name Reynolds. The church hall smelled of coffee and floor polish, the kind of scent that clings to every small-town gathering space, And as I walked in that Saturday morning, the buzz of voices hit me like static, rows of folding chairs filled with relatives, neighbors, old friends who had come to see the spectacle of my father passing the torch to Daniel, and I could feel their eyes flicking toward me. Some with pity, some with curiosity, most with that hunger people get when they sense a downfall coming, because nothing entertains like family blood spilled in public. At the front, my father stood tall, proud in a suit he hadn't worn since Mom's retirement party, Daniel beside him with that smug grin carved onto his face like a mask, and when they saw me, my father didn't wave, didn't even nod, just glanced once as if I were some unwelcome stranger crashing the party, and then he tapped the microphone with a little too much ceremony and said, "Thank you all for being here as I make official what has already been true in my heart. This is my son, my true heir, the one who will carry on the Reynolds name and legacy." And he placed his hand on Daniel's shoulder, squeezing like a king crowning a prince. The applause came loud and eager, people standing, clapping, whistling, and I felt the same sting of humiliation from that night at the VFW hall rise in my throat, but I swallowed it back because today wasn't theirs, today was mine, and I let them bask in it a moment longer, let the smugness bloom on their faces, before I stood up slowly, the pocket watch heavy in my hand, and walked down the aisle toward the front. The room went quiet in waves as people noticed, whispers trailing behind me, and when I reached the stage I didn't look at my father or Daniel. I looked at the crowd, the same neighbors and friends who had once believed in me, and I said, calm and steady, "You all deserve to know the truth before you clap for a lie." I could see my father bristle, his face tightening as he hissed, "Sit down, Michael, don't embarrass yourself again." But I ignored him and pulled from my jacket a small stack of papers, notarized, dated, undeniable, and I held them up for everyone to see. "This," I said, "is proof that Daniel has been stealing from my father's accounts, forging his signature, draining the very savings he claims to inherit." A murmur spread through the crowd like a wave rolling through wheat, disbelief mixing with fascination, and Daniel's smirk faltered just for a second before he forced it back, chuckling nervously. "That's ridiculous. He's making things up," but his voice cracked just enough to betray him. I stepped closer, placing the pocket watch on the podium so its ticking carried faintly into the microphone, a sound like judgment counting down, and I said, "You once told me, Dad, that a man's worth is measured in what he builds and what he leaves behind." Well, here's what Daniel's been building: lies, debts, and signatures he couldn't even fake properly. Gasps broke out as I passed the documents to the pastor, who was supposed to bless the announcement, and I watched as his eyes scanned the papers, his expression hardening before he looked at my father with something like pity. My father's jaw clenched, his hand tightening on Daniel's shoulder, but Daniel was already unraveling, his bravado cracking as someone shouted from the back, "I saw him at the casino in Columbus!" And another voice chimed in, "Didn't he owe money to Rick Lawson's boy?" The tide had turned, and the very public validation they craved was curdling into exposure, suspicion spreading faster than they could contain it. My father tried to salvage it, raising his voice to shout me down, but I stepped closer, calm and low, forcing him to listen. "You chose him because he told you what you wanted to hear. You threw me aside because I worked in silence. You wanted a son who made you look good in public, not one who carried you in private, but appearances can't hold up forever, Dad, and time." I tapped the pocket watch gently, its ticking amplified in the microphone. "Always runs out." The words landed heavy, and for the first time in my life I saw fear in my father's eyes. Not anger, not disappointment, but fear that the image he had built was collapsing right there in front of his entire world. Daniel tried to bolt, muttering excuses, but by then too many people had seen the documents, heard the rumors, connected the dots, and within days the fallout would spread: calls from creditors, investigations into the forged transfers, the small-town gossip machine grinding him into dust. And here was the double twist, the part they never saw coming. I hadn't just uncovered Daniel's fraud. I had documented my father's complicity too, the receipts he had signed, the accounts he had let Daniel manage, the denials he had made when neighbors asked questions, and by protecting Daniel, he had tied himself to the sinking ship, ensuring that when Daniel went under, he'd be dragged with him. The room was chaos now, voices shouting, chairs scraping, some people storming out while others pressed closer for details, and through it all I just stood there, calm, the pocket watch ticking steadily beside me like the heartbeat of justice itself. My father tried to speak again, but the words caught in his throat, his hand slipping from Daniel's shoulder, as if the weight of the lie had finally crushed him, and I picked up the watch, slipping it back into my jacket with quiet finality. This was never about the money, I said, loud enough to carry. It was about respect. And today you've shown everyone exactly what kind of men you really are. I didn't wait for a response, didn't bask in the wreckage. I simply turned and walked back down the aisle, each step lighter than the last, because for the first time in months the weight was gone. Behind me, the empire they had tried to build on my humiliation was crumbling in real time, and I didn't need to stay to watch. It was enough to know the clock had finally run out. As I stepped outside into the crisp autumn air, the leaves crunching underfoot, I pulled out the pocket watch one last time, watching the second hand sweep across its face, and I realized it wasn't just a symbol of patience anymore. It was freedom, proof that timing had always been my greatest ally. I slipped it back into my pocket and walked toward my truck, the voices from inside still echoing faintly, but they no longer mattered. For years I had carried my family, their debts, their burdens, their judgments, and in return they had tried to erase me. But now, stripped bare by their own greed and lies, they were left with nothing but each other, and I was finally free. The double twist was simple. They thought they had disowned me, but in truth I had disowned them, and in doing so I had reclaimed everything they could never take: my dignity, my silence, my time, and that, I knew, was the sweetest revenge of all. If you enjoyed this story, please give a thumbs up to the video and consider subscribing to the channel for more powerful true life stories.